Hey, Tyler, hypothetically, if you were, let's say, stranded on an island and there was no chance of rescue, or maybe some planet somewhere, and you are there with like one other person. And so if the two of you use up your resources, like your water, you could probably survive for 5 days. You're still going to die, but you could survive for 5 days. Or you could murder this person and then you could survive on your own for 10 days and you'd be a murderer and you'd be alone and you'd still die. Which one would you choose?
I mean, tempting to be a murderer, but I'm gonna go with living for 5 days with another person. How about you?
Your morality's so screwed up. Clearly it's the opposite. Um, yeah, at least according to the Twilight Zone and this psychopath.
Yeah. Oh man.
Hello, and welcome to Twilight Zone Tuesdays, presented by Ignore the Bell. So we are talking about I Shot an Arrow into the Air, which is season 1, episode 15, and it first aired January 15th, 1960. And I just want to get some of these technical details out of the way first. This was written by Madeline Champion. Not Rod Serling, and it's not based off a short story. This was an original teleplay by Madeline Champion, who is like not one of the members of the crew, like,
Hmm.
and so it was like people submitted screenplays and it was chosen.
Yeah, I quickly looked it up. From what I saw, it said that she met him at a dinner party,
Oh, okay,
uh,
sorry.
and had just told him the idea, and he was like, "That sounds like a great idea," and ran with it. But he did give her credit, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool. Wow. Okay, I didn't realize like that part of the story. And sorry, and I really didn't mean to cut you off before. I just wanted to get through all of that stuff. Um,
Yeah, no
so
worries.
we do
Uh,
have a sponsor for today's podcast.
yes, well, we should say our names as well.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
And if you're new to this, then what we're doing is I've chosen 13 of some of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes from the original series, not my absolute favorites, but just some that I really like. And we are doing 13 different discussions about this, and we're talking for 13 minutes because 13, the Twilight Zone. Ooh.
Yes, all kinds of fun.
Yeah, I don't know what there is to it beyond that, beyond just ooh, but
Yeah.
here we go. And yeah, so we do have a sponsor for today's podcast. We don't have much ad copy, so it's a pithy one.
Okay.
So today's episode is brought to us by the Serling Canteen Company, preferred by murderous astronauts everywhere.
Oh, all right. Yeah, that sounds great. I guess, is there any particular difference from a normal canteen?
I know that these ones are particularly satisfying to pry off of your team members' dying bodies.
Okay.
It's a
Yeah,
patented design.
gotcha. Yeah, the spout looked a little different from what I
Oh
saw.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, the the water as you get closer to death tastes so much better with these ones. Somehow, again, I really don't know how a lot of these companies that are sponsoring our podcast, like I don't know how they're making money because they've got such niche audiences.
Yeah, yeah, no, I know, but I'm not complaining.
No, me neither. I guess there's more murderous astronauts than I initially thought. I mean, I knew there were some, but I didn't
Right,
know there were
yeah.
this many. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe they're looking to corner that market before it becomes a bigger market.
Good point. Yeah, as technology expands, there's just going to be more and more people who are astronauts. So
Yeah.
why not? Yeah, like get there first. All right, folks. I hope you enjoy.
There is a fifth discussion beyond that which is known to man. It is a discussion as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between anger and joy, between silence and outrage, and it lies between the pit of Nathan's fears and the summit of Tyler's knowledge. This is a discussion of intellectual properties. It is a podcast which we call Ignore the Bell.
All right, season 1, episode 15, I shot an arrow into the air. So this is a really interesting episode, in in part because it's early in the Twilight Zone, but there's a few different things. Like, for one thing, there's nothing, um, as far as a Twilight Zone story, there's nothing supernatural that happens. It's not really in the future. It is, but like the very, very near future. It's not
Yeah.
a different dimension. And like I say, there's nothing supernatural that occurs. It's all just naturally occurring events. Um,
Mhm.
with an interesting twist to it at the end.
Yeah, yeah. It appears to be taking place in well, on a different planet
They say
or comet.
asteroid. Yeah,
Yeah.
comet. Yeah,
Meteor. I don't even know what the differences are.
right. But yeah, and like somehow that it has an atmosphere. It's one of those things where I guess Serling didn't know it in 1960, but whether he knew it or not, it's kind of shocking that just regular people didn't know this stuff. They're like, sure, you could land on an asteroid and there would be an atmosphere and there would be oxygen, and they just, no, that makes sense.
Right.
Because you couldn't do that today. There's
Yeah.
no way. Um, but in any case, yeah. So it gives the illusion that they're somewhere traveling to some other planet or terrestrial body.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. One of the reasons why I really like this twist that it has
Mm,
is because obviously this was, I mean, all of the episodes were filmed, on Earth. um, and so this is one of those examples where we get to see how varied the environments are on Earth.
mm,
Um, the fact that a place that you've never been on Earth can
yeah.
seem like a whole other world.
Right. Right.
And I just think that that is really, really fascinating. And we've, of course, kind of talked about that before in terms of like Star Wars, where they have entire planets that are one thing. And it's like, but
Yes.
Earth has all of these things. So,
Exactly. Yeah, we have so many different like ecosystems and yeah, all kinds of different terrains, and it really does vary. And yeah, you could be fooled into thinking that you're on some whole other planet because Earth really does have a lot of variation to it.
yeah.
So um, so, all right, there's a bunch of different things that I wanted to say with this. So, one of the things, and I was trying to do a little bit of research on this before we started talking, that I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Rod Serling was the co-writer for the adaptation of Planet of the Apes.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Yeah, I always forget every time. I mean, that's like my fifth time realizing it, going, oh, right. And I don't know why I don't remember that he was involved with that. But
Mhm.
this is basically the twist that you get at the end of Planet of the Apes, which didn't come out until 1968. I think it
Right.
was 68, but it was like several years after this. So this is sort of like his first kick at the can, right?
Right. Yeah.
And which is an interesting um, thing. And because I was also looking at it, and this is where I mean, I haven't read the original novel, but I think it's La Planète des Singes, which is
Mm,
it was French, but like the novel
right.
Planet of the Apes. Um, and then, but it's weird because singe is monkeys, and so I'm
Oh.
like, but is there a different word in French for ape versus monkey? But
Hmm.
I know I
I
should
don't
know this, but I don't know it. But in any case, it's La Planète des Singes, and uh, the I don't think in that novel you get that twist ending of seeing the Statue of
know.
Liberty and then it was Earth all along. I'm totally spoiling Planet of the Apes, but if you folks have not seen it, you've had like 50 something years to see this movie. So
Yeah, that's on you.
that's right. It's not my fault. And so, and so in any case, then I don't think that it was in the novel. So I think Serling probably was the one who was like, we got to have that twist ending because he's great at these twist endings. And
Right.
so it's interesting seeing his first kind of attempt to do that. And So that's the first one that I really noticed. The other thing that I just wanted to briefly say with that is I have shown this in English class before, and I've shown it and I pair it with Lord of the Flies, because it's one of the themes of this episode is, and it's something that you can kind of debate. It is how quickly people will abandon the trappings of civilization, the morality that we have as an advanced civilization, and how it can just completely be abandoned by some people. And the whole question of whether you think that's true or not is like a whole other story. But I know like people will criticize the zombie apocalypse genre for that, saying I don't buy the fact that civilization would collapse within days. And other people do think that. So I think it kind of depends on how pessimistic you are about humans.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really great point, and I agree entirely. This episode clearly shows that there are some people who, you know, will hold on to humanity or to, societal morality,
Right.
regardless. Like the idea of, oh well, it's just the three of us, but I'm still the captain. And oh, we have to take care of each other. Oh, we have to, dig these graves for them and everything. Like those types of things are really, really fascinating to see. And then to see the complete opposite of that, where he's just like, well, we're doomed. So no point in holding on to, what society says is acceptable. We're just going to try to survive as long as we can.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, and that's why I asked the question at the beginning of what would you do? Because the guy who's so out of his mind, what's his name? The murdering one?
Corey?
Corey?
I think
Okay.
so.
So the he is completely open about the fact that he knows he's still going to die in 10
Yeah.
days, like by his calculation with that amount of water, and that he would literally rather kill his surviving crew members, steal their water to survive for a few more days. I'm like, number one, like you want to live with that guilt for your remaining days? And that
Right.
doesn't seem to be an issue for him at all. It's like
No,
hanging on to life, even if it's just for like a few more days. For what reason? What kind of life is that? Like,
no idea.
because he
Yeah.
doesn't seem to have any hope that he's going to be able to get rescued, get the rocket
Yeah.
working again, find some oasis on this planet, have
Yeah.
any kind of good life. Like, I don't get that in his desperation he really would rather just survive, just a like delay death just a little bit by any means necessary.
Yeah. It's interesting because this pairs well with the discussion that we had, I guess, last week, about the previous episode that we talked about, the trade-ins,
Mm-hmm.
um, where it's very much, about this, extending life
Yeah.
and that being enough, that like the
Yeah.
idea that this life is the only one.
Right.
um, right? That he doesn't seem to think about what the consequences are, the metaphysical, consequences of becoming a murderer or
Right.
anything. He's just, like, I want to live as long as I can because presumably that's all there is to him.
I guess. And it's such a weird thing of like, even if it's a miserable life and there's nothing, do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
it's one of those things where, because we've seen this before in the Twilight Zone, it is something that Serling seems interested in. Like if you're looking at um, Time Enough at Last, for instance,
Hmm.
where you've got Mr. Bemis, I believe, where he is like the sole survivor of this nuclear blast. And
Hmm.
he ultimately is like, oh, okay, I'll actually be happy with this life, even though he kind of misses his wife and everybody else. He's like, but at least I'll have books. And so that's how he's going to spend eternity. So you go, all right, like, because that episode is very much dealing with you have to have something to live for. And
Right.
this episode, there's not even a consideration by Corey of you need to have something to live for. Because
Yeah.
what exactly is he hoping to accomplish? To just keep wandering the desert, drinking this water? He doesn't even try to find a place in the shade.
Yeah, I know. That's what I kept thinking this whole episode. Like even the captain at the beginning says like, if he's hot, we'll move him to the shade. All of you are hot. Just go in the shade. Why are you still out there in the sun? I can see a shady spot behind you.
It's like the best comment ever. It's so true. It makes no sense why they are just standing in this direct sun, and it establishes that there's night, even though they don't realize that they're on Earth, but obviously this place does have evening, and it's presumably cooling off when you're not under the suns. But it's like, let's just stand out in the open, not even put something on our head, to try to keep it off of us. Nothing. These guys, I don't know how they became astronauts, because they're dum-dums.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
all right. Yeah, you can go ahead.
okay, so there's another movie that I was thinking of that this connects to, and I don't know if you've seen it, and it's been a while since I've seen it, but it's kind of an interesting connection. It has an interesting connection. So it's called Capricorn One. It's from 1978. It stars Elliot Gould, James Brolin, and O.J. Simpson apparently is in it as well. So that's fun. Yeah. And in any case, have you seen Capricorn One?
I have not. No.
Okay. And Elliot Gould, by the way, he plays the Geller's father on Friends.
Gotcha.
That's how people of our generation recognize him. But he was a big star in the 70s and getting into the 80s. So they are astronauts. This is the premise of the film. They're astronauts who are going to go on the first manned mission to Mars. And by the way, folks, I am spoiling Capricorn One for you. Okay. But they're astronauts who are going to go on the first manned mission to Mars, and they're all ready to go with this mission, and they think that it's going to be fine. But then what ends up happening is they get pulled off of the ship suddenly before it takes off, and I forget the reason for this, but then they're brought to a sound stage where it looks like Mars with the lander and all of that, and basically faking the moon landing. And so then you're like, oh my goodness, they don't, the US government doesn't have the belief that they can actually do this, but they want the public to believe that they have the capacity to do this. I think maybe it's in part to compete with the Soviets, right? It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but then the rocket, they really do need it to take off. But then the thing explodes on the launch pad. So these guys should be dead, but they're not dead. So then they are kind of on the run, their own government after them. Because you can't have them be alive, because then it's all going to be revealed that they were going to hoax the entire thing. And so the reason why it makes me think of, there's a lot of running around in the desert with that movie, for one thing, and these astronauts, right, who are not supposed to be on Earth but really are on Earth. So I'm saying, to me, there are some connections here. But then the interesting thing is, for Corey, who realizes that he's on Earth, he's in this position in the Twilight Zone episode of, it would have been better if you weren't on Earth, no matter how bad it would have been. And that's kind of this Capricorn One of it's almost like it would have been better if you just got blown up, because or you ended up on Mars, even though you'd be so far from Earth. But instead you're just in this awful position. So.
Yeah, no, that is really fascinating, to see that there are connections to that film.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm just totally out there on making that connection, but it's an interesting, to me, it's interesting of seeing how you can take this idea of, if these people are supposed to be not on Earth, then it works. But if they're still on the Earth, you're in big trouble.
Right. Yeah.
And so for this guy, he thinks the morality of Earth no longer applies, because I'm not there. I'm not part of that civilization anymore. So I can just dispense with it altogether. And it's no, you can't, because for one thing, you're still on Earth. Because then what's going to happen to him? How can he possibly explain what's gone on? Yeah. And they were supposed to be national heroes. And then to find out that
Right.
One of them is a murderer and the other two are dead.
Yeah.
Like, or I guess, well, it's more than that. It was an 8-man crew. Like, so
Right.
7
Yeah.
people are dead, and the one who survived is a murdering psychopath.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, you could definitely have an entire follow-up episode at the very least, following him trying to explain that it was Pearson who killed the
Yeah, I think
captain.
that's the only way he could get out of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Pearson killed the captain, so I had to kill Pearson. How come Pearson's prints aren't on the gun? Uh,
Yeah, no, I know,
yeah.
but
No,
I
that
think
could be
that's
like a really good follow-up, but
right. I guess my point, the reason why I'm bringing up the connection to Capricorn One is this idea of like they're supposed to be national heroes, and
Mm,
that
yeah.
that but they're not. And in this one, then it's like they should be national heroes, and at least one of them is clearly not.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so that's mostly what I wanted to say. Um,
Okay. Yeah, I had a few comments as well. For one, and I almost, offered this as our intro or sponsor rather. Um, the the water in this, oh my goodness, it's so precious, and yet they're wasting it all over the place. They're like throwing the canteens
yeah,
this way and that. Clearly it's spilling out. Even when he's drinking it, then it's just pouring down his face. Like it's
yeah.
just like, um, don't you want to be a little bit more careful with that? Um,
Yeah. This is such a great example of before there was like any real understanding of what it takes to survive in space. Then
right.
I'm like, you don't even have like a little comment in the script about, oh, the water recycler on the rocket isn't working. That's why we now have a finite amount. It's that
Mm.
what was Serling thinking? That in order to get into space, they'll just take as much water as they possibly can. But once they drank it all, it's gone. Was that
Right.
it? Like,
I think so.
you know what I mean? Because it's such a
Yeah.
weird thing of like, you've only got this finite amount of it. And it's like, how did you expect to travel anywhere in space if you only had that amount of water? Sure, it's hot on this planet or this asteroid, but clearly you didn't have enough to survive any journey
Right.
anywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're not careful with it either. You're absolutely right. And they don't make any rationing plan.
Nope. We don't get to see any food.
No, just, yeah, no mention of food.
Um, yeah, and that brings up my other point, but also asks another question, which is like, I don't think that they mentioned where the mission was supposed to be going to, just that it was the first manned space mission.
Yeah.
So if they just went up to space and then came back down, then they would be back on Earth. So why didn't they think of that being a possibility?
I don't know. And it's, yeah, I guess like, because you're right, there's like so many issues with this, but the because this is a good example of a Twilight Zone episode in a Serling script where he's got a point to make, and
Right.
everything else really isn't that important. That his point is some people will abandon the trappings, the trappings, right, of civilization, of law and order, morality, ethics, all of that very, very quickly, and other people will hold on to it. And now this dude has to live with that guilt and grief of it. That's essentially what he wants to say, but it's pretty clumsy everything else with this,
Right.
of
Yeah.
like how to contrive a situation in which this can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also feel like uh, he sort of ran out of time where you would like Serling ran out of time in the episode where when Corey shoots the captain
Yeah.
and he hits the canteen and it's got
Yeah.
a hole in it. That could be an entire thing in and of itself where it's like
Yes.
all that like I just
Totally.
did all of that to get this small amount of water and now
Yeah.
it's gone.
Yeah.
But we don't get that. He
No.
just goes, oh, And then he moves
Right.
on.
He didn't mind at all that like he
Nope.
killed this guy literally for nothing. Like
Yeah.
that he didn't even get that water. And by the way, if that's the only water that that dude had, a single canteen, how is that going to keep this dude alive for 5 days? Do you know like
Right.
how much water you're supposed to drink in a like in a climate controlled environment? You know what I mean? You have it at like a very reasonable temperature. You're still supposed to have a couple liters a day. And then like in the beating sun like that in Death Valley, like
Yep. Yep. Again, these guys are not paying any attention to rationing or yeah, anything like that.
no, none
Uh,
of that. I want to know when was the first manned space mission? Because it could not have been that long after this.
ooh, that's a good question. I want to say that it was uh, probably 62, maybe even earlier than that. Um,
Yeah, I think. Let me see, because I think it was Shepard who was first in space. Um,
well, it would be Sputnik. That would be.
yeah, but that's not manned.
Oh, right.
Sputnik was just
Yeah.
a satellite.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 1961. Then Alan Shepard, was the first American to travel into space. Oh, and he ultimately ended up walking on the moon in 71. But
Oh, cool.
yeah, but I don't know if the Soviets did a manned mission before that. But yeah, like this was only a year later than
Yeah.
we were in space. And it's like I don't understand. I'm not trying to be too hard on like the creative team of the Twilight Zone in 1960, but you look at that rocket and their ideas of how to get into space, and it was like from like 100 years before we got into space. It was so like that's
Right.
like Jules Verne kind of.
Right.
Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like a
Yeah.
description of like a rocket. It's like you guys were like just about there. Like, and it wasn't anything like that at all. A year later, you got into space and it didn't look like that at all. So it's so surprising that you could still produce something like this in Hollywood in 1960 and people weren't laughing, going, oh, it's a comedy. Look at how silly this
Right.
rocket is. But they're like, that makes sense. That would work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also interesting because in the opening bit, then don't we get like I felt like that was like stock footage of an actual rocket.
Right.
Um, so it's just like so you know what it's going to look like, and then you decide to go with the more cartoonish version.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, it sure looked like stock footage. It really did. Yeah,
yeah,
and like the control center looked pretty realistic.
yeah, yeah,
And then yeah, you see like this rocket ship from like I don't know the 1930s maybe.
yeah,
But again, it's one of those things where you say, yeah, it's not really about the special effects, and most of the time, the special effects in the Twilight Zone don't bother me at all. But it's just such an interesting thing because it's not really a classic, not a classic, but like a common theme or trope in the Twilight Zone of the super near future. Like in the
yeah,
future, the first manned mission into space. You're like, the future? You mean like next fall? Like we
right.
like and so it's just surprising that it's just so off from what was clearly happening in the present moment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so that is the other note that I had, which is the opening sequence in the command center, I
Yeah.
think, is great. It's so great to get that of, seeing that they don't know what happened to the rocket.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so effective. And like we were just talking about, the Cloverfield films, which
Yeah.
you guys can check out that episode of the podcast
Yeah.
from a little while ago. Um, but yeah, and that film does nothing to explain all that. It does
Right.
not show the command center. It doesn't show like what the reaction is or whatever. And this one, then it's like, yeah, okay, we're seeing what they are experiencing right at the incident moment.
Yes.
And that is great.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that this episode would, because I agree with you, I do think that it's great that we see that they don't know where it is. And then we're disoriented too, because we're like, we don't know where they are. The astronauts don't know where they are. No one knows where they are.
Yeah, because it helps us to associate with the astronauts' belief that they are somewhere else. So that
Right.
it really makes it difficult for us to, believe that where they are is Earth.
Good point. That is true. So, what if this episode was written differently, where it's just completely heavy laden with dramatic irony? Where, let's say, the people like at the I don't know, mission headquarters, all of the scientists and engineers there, where they say, okay, we know that it landed somewhere in the Nevada desert. We're not
Mm,
exactly sure where. And then you like intercut with them like closing in and getting closer to where it landed. And then we see
right.
these guys like falling apart and then like murdering each other. And then you're just like, oh
Oof.
no. Like that would be a very different episode. And I wonder if that would work better or worse. Like,
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it would probably be, I mean, it would be completely different,
it would be
and
different.
I think it would be less of a Twilight Zone
Yes,
episode.
I totally agree that it would be less Twilight Zone like to do that because the Twilight Zone really its bread and butter is the twist ending.
Yes, yeah.
And so that's where I'm saying, like, who I don't know, because then it's all of this dramatic irony where we then know, and then we kind of are desperate to stop Corey from doing these things and knowing,
Yeah.
oh, but like he's ultimately going to get caught, and this is going to be like this crazy comeuppance. Um, but yeah, it's a different way of telling this story.
Mm-hmm.
Not so
Yeah.
much a Twilight Zone story, but taking the same premise and then doing something different with it, which kind of like it's interesting looking at that, I guess is what I'm saying, to kind of understand what the Twilight Zone is by saying how could this story be told differently in a way that's not the Twilight Zone but would also be interesting to get that sense of what makes this a Twilight Zone episode when it doesn't have some of those other things that we're accustomed to seeing.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yeah, that is fascinating to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Did you have anything else with this episode?
No, I don't think so. Just people be more careful with your water.
Yeah, absolutely be more careful with your water. All of these things, so like the more that I watch the Twilight Zone, the more it just like confirms my like, I don't know, bias against like people. I'm like, this is why I don't trust anyone.
Right. Yeah.
It just confirms all of these things that I suspect. People are like, you should be more trusting. I've watched enough Twilight Zone episodes. No way.
Oh God. Yay! Great.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Imagine, if you will, subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Leave your comments below and maybe, just maybe, you'll receive a response. All for a channel referred to by many as Ignore the Bell.